So we are here talking about graduating from veterinary school and what it was like then versus now. And we have a panel of different generations. And I'd like to start and have each person on the panel introduce themselves, say where you went to veterinary school and what year you graduated. Wendy?
Hi, I'm Dr. Wendy Hauser, and I'm an Oklahoma State grad, and I graduated in 1988.
And my name is Scott Spalding, and I'm a University of Wisconsin graduate from 1991.
William Hodges, and I graduated from Texas A&M in 2014.
Emily Farmer, I'm a current student at Kansas State, and I will graduate in 2021.
Well, let's talk about the job market. Wendy, when you graduated from veterinary school, what was the job market like? What were your goals when you graduated from veterinary school? And tell me about your career path in a nutshell.
Well, I had actually had a fair amount of equine experience. I grew up on a ranch in Oklahoma with horses, so I thought I would be an equine and small animal practitioner. But as I started looking for jobs, it quickly morphed to all small animal. And I looked on the East Coast because I have older sisters and my best friend were in the mid-Atlantic area. And so I was looking for a practice that had great support. We didn't call it mentorship then, but I wanted great support, and I wanted a larger practice that would be a great learning experience for me. So I was pretty picky. I had a list of questions when I went in, and I kept really good notes after the interview. So it was, I think I interviewed at 4 places, and I had applied for an internship. So I did get placed in a program, but it was with the early VCAs in Detroit. And that was not where I'd hoped to go. So I ended up going to a practice in New Jersey.
What was the job market like when you graduated?
You know, it was not hard to get a job. I had offers from 3 of the 4 places that I interviewed. And then they just had to sit and wait until after the match. And they were all willing to wait to find out if I was going to be on the market or not.
And Scott, what was the job market like when you graduated, and tell me about your career path?
So in 1991, there was, I think there was a plethora of jobs available at that time. And I think I had numerous job offers, probably 6 or 7 job offers. I grew up as a Wisconsin farm kid. And when I graduated from veterinary school, I think I could have done almost small animal or equine. I ended up in a practice that it's the practice that I'm still at today. That was my first job. I've been there since 1991. And the first year I did mixed animal, and so I was in the small animal exam room doing small animal, and then out on the farms. And I found myself really being happy out on the farms rather than cooped up in a small exam room. So I practiced for 27 years as a large animal veterinarian doing primarily equine.
William, what was the job market like when you graduated from school?
So in 2014, we were just really kind of mostly recovering from 2008, 2010. And so it was healthy comparatively to where it was like all through vet school. Because during vet school, everybody was talking about how like rough it was out there. And then when we graduated, it had started to recover. So it wasn't hard, but it was great jobs if you were willing to go to them, but if you were the ones that were like really specific to an area, it was a little bit harder for you to find it. And the other thing is I kind of grew up on a farm as well with beef cattle and stuff like that, and so in Texas, and so I liked the idea of mixed animal a lot, and that was also kind of when mixed animal stopped really existing in like a large scale way, unless you went to like where that was, which is usually smaller towns and stuff. And that wasn't as exciting for me. So I ended up in emergency because I didn't know what else to do kind of thing. So I wouldn't say it was bad, but it wasn't the same as what it sounds like you guys are describing. So.
And Emily, you are still in veterinary school. How would you describe your impression of the job market today?
Well, in school, they talk to us a lot about it, and they always use words like strong and healthy, and they throw around statistics like there are 6 jobs for every veterinary student, and so they make it sound like we really have our pick of what we want to do. They do say that there are certain need areas which are obviously harder to fill, but they really give us the impression that we really have the ability to pick whatever we would like to do for our first position.
And Emily, as you look towards graduating from veterinary school, what are you looking for in an employer? What are the things that are most important to you as you evaluate different options and different employers?
Sure. So we always hear the buzzword mentorship, and it's always kind of hard. No one really defines what they actually want in that. But I think it's a lot like Wendy was saying, just support in a practice, support from my employer, feeling the ability to be able to come in and contribute to things like the culture. Because obviously when you add a new person to your practice or any business, the person's going to change how everything was already running. And so I'd really like someone who is open to that change and not resistant in allowing me to do what I would like to do, was still in reasonable bounds of what is already existing in the practice. I think we have a lot of issues facing our veterinary profession these days, and finding someone that is willing to help address those issues and really contribute to what I feel passionate about is also important to me.
What are some of the issues that you are seeing that the industry is experiencing right now?
Mental health is definitely the big one. Suicide rate increasing. There's a lot of talk in school about it. I know a lot of schools have tried to find ways to address the mental health while in school, and then also out in practice with different communities, online communities that offer support for people experiencing difficulties in their mental health.
Just out of curiosity, did you guys have any of that kind of concern when you were graduating?
The emotional distress
Yeah.
or concern? Yeah, I don't remember that as being an issue when we were...
It certainly wasn't talked about. It certainly happened. I had a classmate who committed suicide in his first year out of school. I've had a few more since. I had some in the classes below me.
Okay.
So suicide happened. It's always happened.
Okay.
We just didn't get the perception of it because there wasn't social media.
Okay.
You heard about it through written articles or telephones.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the emotions, I try not to say I remember how I feel when, because I don't know that how I felt is relevant to how you feel.
Yeah.
But when I talk to a lot of students, because I love students, so I do talk to a lot of students, when I talk to them and I say, I remember when I graduated from vet school, now we have a term for it, the imposter syndrome, right? I'm called a doctor, I have all the knowledge I need, but how do I, and I bet this resonates with you, Scott, how do you apply it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But at that point, you just got out and did it, and you learned. So it's scary any which way you look at it, because you have to transition into that leadership and ownership role of being a doctor. I don't mean practice ownership, I mean owning your profession.
Let's talk about mentorship. Scott, when you and I were first talking this morning, you said mentorship is different today than it was when you graduated. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I think to your point, I think mentorship is really one of those key words that it's out there all the time. And people oftentimes say the word mentorship and without really defining exactly what that means. And I think it means something different to almost everybody that talks about it. I think number one, to be a mentor, it's easy to say I'm going to be a good mentor, but being a good mentor really takes a commitment. And it's something that as a mentor you need to be there. I also think to be a mentee, I think again it's easy to say I want to be mentored, but then when it truly comes to being mentored, there's a commitment to that. And I think today, compared to when I was first in practice, I think today it's more than just learning how to be a veterinarian. I think it's not only learning to practice good medicine and good surgery, it's stepping into that leadership role. It's truly understanding what the culture is in these practices. And there are some practices out there that just have tremendous cultures and are very open and warm and welcoming and receiving. And there's other practices out there that are really challenging. And I think that makes a big difference. It's just the type of person as a new graduate that you are and what you want to accomplish, and then finding that right fit in that practice. And then I think it's going on to developing that leadership skills. And I heard it here already this morning where recent graduates want to get into a practice where they can make a difference, where they can have an impact. But I think as a practice owner, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people that can come into our practice and have a different perspective of the industry. If you look at and I don't talk about just the veterinary industry, the veterinary profession, I talk about the animal health industry. And we look for really good general practitioners that are just great communicators, that have a vision for the future, that have the courage to try things, that when the phone rings and an animal owner calls with a problem, they find a way to say yes. And so that's kind of how it fits in the practice. But then I see even at the next level is just people that are in a position to open doors for people and actually opening the door rather than just encouraging people to open the door themselves. I think those are some of the things that have kind of changed from my perspective over the years.
That's good insight. And William, how do you view mentorship? And as you graduated a few years ago, what were you looking for in a mentor, and how were you mentored?
When I think back on it, I don't remember wanting, like, specifically targeting and wanting mentorship, because I felt kind of a little lost when I graduated, because I had initially thought that I was going to do something like mixed animal. And then when that didn't become available, I was kind of in this weird position of not sure what I wanted to do. And so when I did find the opportunity that I did find in an emergency practice, I was really kind of just excited to learn if I could actually do what it was that I was supposed to be doing from vet school, right? Because I didn't work in veterinary practices before vet school. So I wasn't really sure what any of that was going to be like. So when I think back on it, like, what did I really think of as mentorship? I would say that I probably thought of it simply as having somebody available for the situations that I didn't know how to handle. And I was fortunate that I got into a position where the practice was really forced to mentor me for like a 3-month period because I didn't have a license, so they kind of like had to. So I was fortunate in that, and I'm not sure what it would have been like had I not had that availability to me. But I was comfortable. I was comfortable in those positions because I felt that. I felt that I wasn't really alone even on the days that I was alone, because they made it clear that they were available, and they would, in the right circumstances, they would have, come in or whatever, like at least been available on the phone. So I didn't feel like I was by myself, and that, I guess that's a little bit what it was. It was just like, I'm okay going there, but I want to be able to like hold your hand in case and need it. And that to me is what it was. And I had that. Now when I'm talking to students and working with interns and things like that, it feels like I see both perspectives. I see students that really want to have that anonymity and be allowed to explore a little bit, but as long as there's somebody there. Like, I work with an intern right now, and she regularly wants to try things and just asks me, but if you don't mind, like, don't go see a room for the next 20 minutes, like just do some paperwork so you're in the office in case I need something. Like, absolutely. Like, and she rarely ever asks for it. She just wants to know that there is that option there in case she gets to a spot that she's not comfortable. And so I see that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, and I'm not sure why, I see other students where they are barely even willing to try things unless you're right there standing next to them. And it's almost feels like they've been like scared into a point where like they think something is going to go wrong, like for sure. And when it does go wrong, it's going to be like a bomb explodes. Like, there's not any time to recover. And I'm not sure why that is. But
when we were talking in Washington, D.C. this summer, I made a comment to you. I said that, I've interviewed a large number of students graduating from school and newer grads, and one of the things that they talk to me about is they are reluctant to do surgery, for example, or dentals, and you and I had an interesting conversation about that. Let's talk about that for a minute. Do you have any concerns about coming out of school and doing surgery or dentals?
No, I'm probably one of the few that's actually very excited to try a lot of things. I'm probably fit more in the first example that William had. But I know a lot of my classmates are very particular about certain things that they absolutely do not want to do. And it's very interesting to kind of hear that perspective.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is something that I hear often? And then William, might also like your viewpoint on that as well.
So I think growing up, a lot of the younger generations are taught more and more to communicate feelings and be stronger in expressing disinterests. They are really trying to get the most out of what they want in a position, and it also goes to the status of the current job market as well. We're also constantly told that we can basically pick what we want in a practice because there are so many open positions. So I think that contributes as well.
That's good information. William?
Yeah, so I think that what she just said is what kind of helps me in answering that, is that the younger generations are really good at expressing disinterest, right? We've gotten a lot better at our comfort with saying no and saying like, and I don't know if you call it like disobedience, but like it's like they're more comfortable standing up for what they don't want to do, and I think a lot of times we hear that from the outside, and like we assume that that's true. And I'm not totally, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not totally convinced that a lot of those individuals that say they will never do that really mean that they would never do that. It's just that's their gut response, is that they don't. Mm-hmm. But when they're actually in the position and they get the opportunity to learn some of these things, like they might, some of them maybe, might be a little bit more willing to try and engage with that stuff. Would you? Yeah,
I would agree, especially if there is someone there that's willing to step in if something goes awry.
Right, so like if they say I'm not willing to do dentals, what I hear is I'm not willing to do dentals day one by myself. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't think anybody wants them to do that, right? For the most part. And that seems to be the difference for me, is that when I'm talking with students in school and I'm hearing some of these perspectives, and then I'm working with interns at some of the relief places that I go to, that's not this. It doesn't ever seem to match up. The stuff you're hearing in schools and the stuff and that kind of stuff just doesn't seem to be the same individuals that I'm working with out in the field. And maybe that's because I'm tailoring myself by only working with interns that generally want to be more engaged and stuff like that. I suppose that's possible. But
I'm curious, Wendy, when you were coming out of school, did you feel that way? Did you jump right into surgery? How did you?
So I went to a 12 vet practice. We had very, very innovative hospital. They had the main hospital.
80s, a 12 vet practice?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, they had the main hospital. They had 3 satellites.
Oh, okay.
And they added a 4th while I was there. Part of the reason I chose this hospital, you were scheduled for 60 to 80 hours a week. So I knew what I was getting into. I knew I was going to work hard. I knew I was going to see a huge caseload. We had rounds every day, one of the owners, and then the senior associates, and then they hired 3 associates the year I started. Myself, a Michigan grad, and an Iowa State grad. And they preferred the central or upper Midwest graduates because I had received so much hands-on training in school. They knew that we were a faster starter. So there was always, and when you were in surgery that first year, you had a half-a-day surgery a week, and there was always a senior associate or an owner in with you, most of the time senior associates. And I still stay in touch with my senior associate that I spent most time with. He just retired. So I think that with 60 to 80 hours a week, there really wasn't a break-in period. These were cranking practices that you did not have anyone helping you in the exam room. So you were doing everything in 10-minute appointments. It was very, very different. All the CE, restraining the animal, having the owner restrain the animal, it was just a different time in medicine. And we made it work, and we kept good records, and it was a great learning experience. I owe a lot to that hospital because they did practice good medicine. So I think that it's not unusual to feel tentative when you go out there. It's new. And again, you've got it all up here, but how do you get it to translate to here? So that was what support looked like to me. So I certainly have some strong feelings. We can circle back around to what the relationship between mentors and mentees should look like.
You mentioned you worked 62 to 80 hours a week?
60 to 80.
Okay. And today, one of the things that I hear often from employers is that they complain that they cannot find people to work 40 hours a week or more than 40 hours a week. I'm curious about that. You were working 60 to 80 hours a week. Today, people aren't interested in working more than 40 hours a week. William and Emily, I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, Emily will be the better candidate because like that was not something that we talked like it was even considered really when I was graduating. So it is fascinating that in 5-6 years you've seen this drastic shift in that direction. Because I mean, when I graduated, there were options of slower, smaller stuff. Like I'm pretty sure if you really wanted to, you could find a certain small animal practice that is around the country. You could probably get a job there for 4 days a week and stuff like that, especially in certain areas. If you were willing to go there, you could have negotiated that. But in general, you didn't talk about that. You found a job and you went to work, and you generally, you negotiated a little bit here and there, but like how much time you actually worked and the schedule of the hospital was not up for real negotiation. You were, for the most part, trying to fit that mold. So it's not something that we really had that opportunity. I kind of get it. Like, I mean, I think she'll be the better candidate to describe why that's a trend and happening.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are in search of better well-being and like more willing to fight for that. I go back and forth and talking to other students, and a lot of them are searching for either part-time work or multiple part-time jobs or just a 4-day work week. And I think a lot of that points to the well-being and wanting a good work-life balance.
Well, and may I point out, just because I worked it, I knew what I was getting into.
Yeah.
But as an owner, I never asked my associates to keep that type of a schedule. So my second job, I worked about 40 hours a week. And when I was an owner with the schedules, it was anywhere from 38 to 43 scheduled hours a week, and with a 3-day weekend every other weekend.
Yeah. See, I mean, that would be competitive, I think, in today's market, right?
So just because I did it didn't mean it was right, but I knew what I was getting myself in for.
Right.
And I chose that practice.
And I think a lot of the hard thing is when you're talking with students these days, you'll mention something like that and everybody just shuts off about how, wow, I would never. But there is a certain level of value that brought you, does it not, right? And that's something that I talk to students a lot too when I'm like, it's super stressful, it's super hard, but that's why internships are valuable, is because they do have those kind of schedules that are just incredibly challenging. The difference is you could get that schedule by just going out into the real market, but that's a different conversation entirely.
Well, we talked about the current job market, and the current job market, it does favor the job seeker. So our employers having to compromise on what they want in an employee.
I don't think we have to compromise. I think there's a few things that have happened. Living through the Great Recession of 2008 to 2010. Yeah. In our practice in Janesville, Wisconsin, we had a General Motors plant that closed there, and it really significantly impacted our practice, and our practice contracted by 30 to 40% by 2011. It really, but since that time, the economy locally has rebounded, and it's unbelievable how busy we are right now, and it's been that way for the last few years. And it seems like there's almost an unprecedented demand for an increase in veterinary services. There's so many, I would say on the equine side, the equine industry really took a hit in the Great Recession, and really there's a lot fewer horses out there today than there was in 2005, 2006, 2007. I think it's kind of bottomed out, and it's maybe starting to rebound a little bit. On the small animal side, though, You look at the growth of the animal health industry over the last 10 years, and it's just phenomenal how much it's grown. So we have that, an unprecedented increase in the demand for veterinary services. We have, we talk a lot about veterinarians that are leaving the profession, that are retiring or leaving the profession. And, we think, I think AVMA kind of thinks that maybe around 3,000 veterinarians retire a year. But I happen to think there's a lot more that are leaving the profession and doing other things. We have 4,500 approximately new graduates that are coming in every year. So, we have maybe 4,000 to 5,000 leaving the profession. We have 4,500 coming in, and we have this huge increase in demand for veterinary services. I think the other thing is that this demand looks a little bit differently. Our pet owners, they're really busy people oftentimes, and so many veterinary practices are still, they open at 8 and they close at 5. And, in our practices in Wisconsin a few years ago, we started having evening office hours and things like that. And, we'd been in this location for 25 years, but people were coming into our practice that were, in the community, and they go, I never knew this is where your practice was. But that's because when they were driving by, we were closed up. The lights were off, the doors were closed. And so right now, most of our new customers are coming from non-traditional office hours. So that whole demand piece looks much different. So I think back to when I first started, I think I was very similar to what Wendy said, and I essentially worked on my own from day one. I never really had anybody. I very distinctly remember my first day in practice, and I was out in the truck, and I was out doing farm calls, and nobody showed me where the vaccine was or anything. And I thought, okay, I just rolled up my sleeves and did it. And I think one big difference is I remember then we were all independent. We virtually did everything ourselves. And I think at that point in time, as a large animal practitioner, I kind of staked out my turf, and I worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to protect that turf. And I didn't want anybody else coming on my farm seeing my horses or anything else like that. And today I see it's much more collaborative, and I think that word came up. And so for me, it was important that I was the one that was seeing those patients. But today, I think what's most important for most young graduates is that there's a successful outcome for the patient, a successful outcome for the animal owner. And I don't think that it's as important to them whether it's they're in charge of that or it's another doctor in the practice or a practice down the road or a referral. I think for them, outcome is really important. I think...
That's a good way to put it.
And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but that's something that I just see. But so I think this collaboration is, this attitude of collaboration, I think it's really good. And I think it's really healthy because it's become much more complicated to provide veterinary services today. And I would say I was probably in practice 6 or 8 years before I had a technician that was riding in the truck with me. And in my area, I was one of the first large animal doctors that had a technician with me. It was, it really changed the way I, as a doctor, interacted with the client and interacted with the patient. And I would be able to get out of the truck and I would just be able to talk to the horse owner and really develop a really close relationship with them and find out really what their concerns were. And horse owners really value that, value your time and the ability to talk about everything that's going on with their horse. And so I think one thing that's changed in our practice over the years, we talk about this a lot, is that we're more than veterinarians. Our staff is more than veterinarians. We're truly animal experts. And I think that is something, as we get more and more people around us and supporting our doctors and providing services, we need to look at those people all being animal experts and playing an important role in the healthcare process for those animals. And I think that's where there's a really big opportunity. And if we as a profession don't own that, there's a lot of other people right now willing to step into that and take that over. And the example that I cite very often was equine dentistry. And when I graduated, I had very little training in dentistry. We knew teeth were important for horses, but veterinarians, as a general rule, back in the 90s, they didn't really do much equine dentistry. So we had a lot of lay dentists that were stepping into that role and were generating a lot of revenue and not necessarily doing what was in the best interest of the patient. But veterinarians abdicated that. And, that was an area for us to bring back into the practice and became a big, big part of our practice. So,
Scott, you just talked about the supply and demand, and what pressures is the current job market putting on employers when looking for a new associate?
Right now I have 3 practices in Wisconsin. We could easily employ 3 more small animal doctors that we just haven't been able to fill those positions. If I look across Mavana, our group of practice, we have 35 practices across the country. There's probably 40 to 50 doctors right now that we could use in our practices. And we just can't find them. So I think what we're really looking at doing is looking at the whole healthcare team, trying to put a more intentional system and process around each one of our doctors so our doctors can see more patients and can be more productive. And again, then that really rolls back to really focusing on the culture in the practice, that everybody works together really well, that people enjoy coming to work, that we're having fun, because it gets to I just marvel at some of the busy days we have and how many patients, actually go through some of our practices. It's incredible.
You talked about the pet owner. They don't just come between the hours of 8 and 5, Monday through Friday. You mentioned how they need, they want to come in the evenings or on the weekends. One of the things that I have been hearing frequently from doctors is that they don't want to work on weekends. Have you experienced that?
No, we've not experienced that, and but we have let our young doctors kind of make what they want it to be. And we actually have some doctors that enjoy providing evening office hours because they can maybe come into work at noon or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They can have their morning off and kind of work those non-traditional hours. And they can be really busy. They can generate a lot of revenue. They can make a little bit of extra money, and it seems like they enjoy doing that. But I think you have to have. I don't think the practice can dictate that. I think that you have to work together to figure out what that looks like. And we've even done some of that on the equine side, where as in our really busy times of the year, equine doctors often work well into the evening, and so our equine group a couple of years ago said, well, we're just going to start scheduling regular office hours in the evening, a couple nights a week. But on those days where we're going to be scheduling to work late, we're going to start later in the day. And it was a really easy thing to do, and it's worked out really well. So I think that's what we look. I think what we look for in our younger doctors are ideas to come in to help address some of these challenges that we have. And I think for us as practice owners, realizing that we don't have all the answers and we need to work together to figure out what this looks like. There's huge opportunities here if we can work together and figure it out. So I encourage our young doctors to really, don't, in the mentoring process, oftentimes they come and they ask me a lot of questions when we have our regular mentoring sessions, but very rarely do I give them the answers. It just becomes a discussion. And because I've been doing this for nearly 30 years, and I don't necessarily have all the answers, and it's a different time today, and we need different ideas, different perspectives.
So you said that you feel that the practice shouldn't dictate some of the details of the position. How does that sound to you?
Slightly terrifying.
Oh, really? Really? Okay.
But also interesting and exciting. I think depending on who you are, it could go either way. But to me, it sounds fun.
Right. Well, it sounds like what your idea is that you want to hire the person. You're not trying to fill a position. You're trying to hire the right person, and then that person then adjusts and fits into your schedule as it makes sense, right? So when you say that, Stacey, you're talking to practices that are trying to hire people that may have to work a weekend, that's one of the requirements. Does it not sound possible that you just hire the right person and then your schedule adjusts? Whether that person doesn't work weekends or not, the schedule adjusts.
Tailoring the job around the person and their wants and desires.
Because isn't that the core idea of like the modern job market? Is like you're trying to hire the right individual. Like, and so I don't know, that resonated with me a lot.
And I think, as we're saying that, I think one of and Margaret has actually very recently become just a really strong leader in our practice. And Margaret graduated, it'll be 3 years ago now. And I met Margaret in a small Cambridge. They have coffee. She was a fourth-year student, and we were going to meet for half an hour and just get to know each other. And our meeting ended up being, I don't know, a 2-hour meeting, and I just thought, I need to hire Margaret. And we walked away from the table with Margaret having a job, and we weren't even looking to hire somebody. But it was the right person at the right time. And it has been, I think, probably one of the best, I don't know if we've ever had a better hire in our practice than that. But that's one thing that she's been able to come into the practice, and she's really kind of been able to define what that role looks like. And this last year, our equine practice was up to over 20%. And I'm not in the practice anymore. I've got 3 younger associates that are doing it, and they're not necessarily doing it the way I would have done it, but it's not wrong. It's just different. It's just different. It works for them.
How have the working condition expectations of employed veterinarians changed over your time in the field?
Well, I think it depends on what area you're looking at. So obviously, you heard Scott and I say we had a plethora of jobs. Now, I chose to leave Oklahoma. Had I stayed in Oklahoma, it was a different story, because the savings and loan crisis and agriculture crashed both at the same time in '88, and people couldn't afford to put food on the table and shoes on their kids' feet. They weren't going to pay for vet care. So I chose to go to a more affluent area. And so I had a different experience than my classmates might have in Oklahoma finding a job. And my younger sister is a veterinarian, and she graduated 4 years after I did. And it was challenging for her to find a job because she wanted to stay in Oklahoma. So I think it depends in part when you graduate and what the market forces are. As far as other expectations, I believe that employers have to flex a little bit more, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that one of the things we do very poorly, and this has been highlighted in this morning's conversation, that we do very poorly in this profession is we paint our people, all of our people, regardless of the position, into boxes based on their job description. We don't let their strengths shine. We don't let them to choose within that job description what motivates them and what do they want to own. And I made this mistake as an owner. I had an amazing technician that loved to create protocols and procedures and was great at it. But I needed her in the exam room because she was an equally strong communicator. So we made a deal that a couple of hours a week that she could work on things along these lines, but then she wanted more, and that's where the conflict happened. So I think having good, honest conversations, finding good middle ground, having these conversations before the person is hired. Emily, for you, understanding the why of the practice, understanding their core values, knowing your why, knowing your core values, you can begin to have some defined criteria that let you know if you're really going to match. Spending time in the practice before you take the job, hugely important from both perspectives, for the employer and the employee. And when you ask in your interview process, what are you going to do for me? Please know what you're going to do for the practice. And that sounds intuitive, but I don't know about your experience. That's not always what we get back. And I did want to talk a little bit, you guys said about the environment, the mentor-mentee relationship. It is a relationship. It is an equal responsibility contract between two people. So the mentor is expected to support. As Scott pointed out, he doesn't give answers. He asks the questions and helps you find the answers, but he wants them to come from you. But the mentee has an equal responsibility in that role. And there should be a contract of expectations that is gone over so that we are going to meet weekly for the first 2 weeks. I am going to review all of your medical records for the first month. For the first 2 weeks you start with me, you're not going to see appointments. You're going to watch me. You're going to shadow. You're going to get introduced to the clientele. When you start your surgeries, I am going to schedule you in my surgery schedule so that I am in my office working on other things and available. If you need me in the room with you, I will be right there. Didn't get a lot of dental training? Fine, I will invest in you right off the bat, and I will send you to some excellent dental training we have in Colorado. These were all things I did. But you, as a new graduate and a younger graduate, need to have the understanding that this is what this is going to look like. And how are you going to take these opportunities and translate them into growth for the practice?
Exactly. I think that's where a lot of the disconnect is with younger students, is that they don't always fully understand that it is an equal relationship, and they expect the mentor to lead and just provide everything for them.
Is that being provided in vet school? That kind of explanation of the mentor-mentee relationship?
In some aspects, not always. I think it goes back to, again, how we were raised and wanting to express disinterests in things. They don't like, or they want the mentor to lead and hold their hand and guide them through everything without the expectation that they also have to contribute and ask for certain things from the mentor.
So this is the second time you've said that. Mm-hmm. I have a cusp millennial Gen Z and a Gen Z, 2 children. And I will tell you that a lot of the behaviors that we see that may cause pain points for veterinary employers are things that we as parents have provided for our kids. You need extra resources. You need tutors. My daughter's in med school. She's talking about how expensive the tools to study for her step test are going to be. And my husband's like, just get them. Set yourself up for success. Get that tool. We will provide those resources for you to help you have every advantage. And we're lucky because we're in a financial situation that we can do that. My parents always talked to me like I was an adult. It was natural for me to talk to my children. The generation that you are that's actually become a normal part of parenting. We solicit your opinions. What car should we buy? Hey, we're going to go on vacation. Where do you want to go? So we've always treated you with an elevated status in the family. Therefore, you're very confident in your abilities to have a conversation with an adult when you were younger and as a peer, regardless of what role. You know, Scott is a CEO in his group of practices, yet he's utterly approachable to any of his employees. And I think that that's how you would want it to be, right? But in previous generations, that hierarchical balance would have been a little bit of a check. Yeah. So that gets back to how you were raised, but most of us, Stacy has children that are Gen Zs, and you know she probably identifies with how she raised her kids to solicit their input. It just builds a different esteem.
Yeah, a couple of comments to go along with that, and I think oftentimes when I think about a mentoring relationship, I almost think of it rather than mentoring. I think it almost as parenting, you know, and that's kind of where you went with that. And I think for me, that's a real natural way to do it. I also think that this mentoring relationship, from my perspective, is, you know, I truly believe that if we look around the room here, we have all the answers if we have the right discussion. Yeah. So oftentimes I find myself as a mentor just kind of helping connect the dots, you know, and sometimes that's just what people, they have the answers, they're just not connecting the dots. And I think oftentimes that's, you know, I think it's more valuable as a mentee if you connect the dots yourself with a little bit of guidance. And I think that's a very valuable way to learn.
That segues into my next question. Let's talk about generational differences and how we communicate. And how does that affect the workplace with how the different generations communicate? William, I'd like for you to answer that question because you go into a lot of different practices and you see how different people communicate from different generations.
Yeah, so communications, it is really quite different between it's different between every aspect, right? It's not just generations, it's the differences between hospitals, it's differences between locations of the country, right? Because I also travel to various parts of the country and working in like Massachusetts, is a completely different communication style than in, Pittsburgh and stuff like that. And so but specifically looking at the generations, I think that when I'm dealing with older colleagues, it's a lot of times they like it to be more poignant. They want to know information. They don't want to know the supportive information as much. And that's sometimes it comes off to like, I've seen it more like from the outside as I watch interns interact with or younger graduates interact with the older graduates and stuff. A great example now that I'm thinking about it is you have a really young early 20s technician that's coming in, and she is trying really hard to keep tabs on all that's happening in the front, right? We're talking an emergency practice. And so her job is triage. Everything that comes in the door, she's supposed to know what's happening with it, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of times she'll come back and she'll tell us. She'll just open up the doctor's office and tell us, this walked in the door. And one of my older colleagues, she'll close the door and then she'll just start cursing and being like, gosh, what a useless person, what? Whereas I'm saying I agree. The information she provided us does not change anything. We are not going to do anything with that information, but it was important for her to feel like she was making sure everybody knows. To her, it was really important to provide as much information as possible, because that's what we are, right? We're constantly on sources of information. We're constantly receiving information. And if we take a moment to stop, it feels weird and it's almost uncomfortable, and you almost feel like you're missing something, right? Mm-hmm. Is that wrong? No, for our younger generation? And so that's how I see what she's doing. She is being she's like Twitter. She's being a constant source of information. And my older colleague was like, this is useless. I want none of this. You're just making my life more complicated, because now I'm thinking about the next thing that's coming in the door. And so I think that to me highlights the biggest difference between the generations that I see, is that we as younger generations, we're just used to, I'm not going to say that we're used to the faster pace, because we get kind of uncomfortable when we're dealing with 10-minute, 15-minute appointments. But at the same time, and that's interesting that I'm thinking about it, because at the same time, we want constant updates and information. So I'm not sure, that's what it feels like from the perspective, but I don't know why there is that difference now that I'm talking through it.
So not only are there generational differences, and generational differences really depend on how you were raised and the forces that were in place in the world when you were growing up. So there are some true generational differences. But if you were raised, and I talk about this when I present all the time, and I get some really great feedback. And I had one young woman who said, I am a baby boomer. She's in her 20s. She said, I was raised by my grandparents who were immigrants, and my values align with the baby boomer generation. So I think that I think it goes a little further. I suspect what you're hearing is a difference in communication styles. So the older vet may be an introvert. She's probably getting stressed by knowing that there are all these cases that are out there waiting. She's probably focusing on getting her work in front of her done. And so this is an interruption to her thought process. And maybe this younger technician is a little bit more affiliative, or a little bit more what I like to call a sunny personality that likes to talk and give a lot of explanation. Yeah. And so I think that when we communicate with people, generational differences are huge. When you ask for, when someone gives advice of my generation, they typically, they expect their advice to be followed. When you give advice, you just want to be heard. And so there are some generational differences depending how we grew up and those forces that shaped us. But I think a bigger issue here is our personality preferences and how we like to give and receive information. Yeah. So I'm a little bit more like probably that older veterinarian, just because I don't need, if I ask you how your weekend was, I don't need you to go on 20 minutes and tell me how your weekend was. And I have had team members that do that. You're laughing.
Yeah, I'm the same way. That's exactly what I was thinking. And but I think it's not only true of younger veterinarians, I think it's true of older veterinarians. And I think there are older veterinarians that are in our practices that are of a millennial mindset. Yeah. And I think it's very true that there are younger doctors that are of a baby boomer mindset or somewhere in between. And, I think I've learned that over the years. There's a couple of our doctors in our practice that I do not ask them about a case because I'm going to be listening to them 20 minutes later. And it's like, I don't even know what you're talking about anymore. It's like, I want the bullet points.
Land the plane.
Yeah, that's all I want. And I think that's one thing that I've worked really hard on to just improve the way I'm able to communicate is to improve my listening skills. And somebody might come to me with an issue, and I might be in my office working on something, and I've learned to say that right now is not a good time. And there's nothing wrong with that. Can I come and find you later this afternoon, or can we talk about this tomorrow morning? And, I think some really little things like that can really make a big difference to enhance communications and the other thing I'll say to people too is, okay, this is what I heard you say, is that correct? And, or Wendy, I heard you say this. And because oftentimes people will talk and I don't hear what they're really saying and what they're really meaning. So I think there's some of those tools that we can be very intentional in really getting much more engaged in that communication process.
I think Twitter's done that to us because we're so used to hearing in those sound bites that one line. We don't want to hear a 20-minute story. How do our values and desires change during different life stages? So, for example, younger employees may want to prove themselves more, but an older employee may want to feel that their work is valued, and not every person reaches the same life stage at the same age.
Again, it's where you are in life and what you want out of life or what you think you want out of life. I had one young associate. I love hiring new grads. I think they are the absolute best. They're diamonds in the rough, and I get to help them to figure out how to shine. So I had one that said, I'm never going to have kids. And I just smiled inside to myself and thought, oh, you probably will. So 2 children later, I'm never going to be a practice owner. Successful sale, and now is working in leadership for a corporate entity. So I think that things change as you mature. You guys have big financial pressures. I mean, we had financial pressures, but not to the magnitude. So I think I had $10,000 in student loans when I graduated. My starting salary was $28,000. My rent was
just out of curiosity, did $10,000 feel like a lot to you?
Well, I was making $28,000 a year, gross. My apartment was $575 a month. I had a car payment of $200 a month, and I had a student loan of $219.10 a month. So when you think of $28,000, there wasn't much left to live on at the end. But I do think, and you're seeing it in the Merck Wellbeing Study, our mid-career, those 30-year-old vets are feeling this stress. It's hard. We could get into a whole conversation, which is off topic, about gender and the conflicting feelings you have as a woman and as a mom, and for me as a practice owner. So I do think that that it depends where you are in your life. And I also do believe that it is that you're going to have different pressures because of financial pressures. I would hazard to say Scott and I are pretty happy right now with where we are in life. We're doing things because we can to make choices, and we can follow the passions that we have. I think practice ownership is absolutely the key to that. It gives you the flexibility, and honestly, with student loan debts of $165,000 to $400,000 plus, I don't see how you're going to get out of debt if you don't own a practice. I also think it's the best thing you can do to grow yourself, but not everyone is meant to be a practice owner. So,
how should employers respond to the life challenges that are facing today's veterinary graduates?
But actually, before you respond, I want to see what the current graduate thinks of that. How do you think hospitals should respond to the stressors that you guys are having?
Well, I think we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, being open to allowing us to come in and put our mark on the practice, put our mark on the position, and really viewing us as the individual and not forcing someone to fit a certain job description.
Yeah, and I think I would echo that. I think, I see a lot of practices around the country, as I'm sure you do. And it always strikes me how many practices are out there that their business model has not changed all that much from the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s.
And they don't want to change.
And they don't want to change. But if you look at our animal owners, the consumers of our professional services, the way their buying habits have changed, the way they interact with businesses they purchase services from, has changed dramatically. And I think that is just such a huge opportunity for practices and for new veterinarians to come in and look at what does the business model look like. And I worry that if the profession doesn't change, more and more practices are going to become irrelevant. And you look at some of the really interesting business models out there, and Lap of Love and what Danny's done with her business. I mean, 20 years ago, whoever thought that there would be a practice that's dedicated to end of life and hospice services? And I think that's just absolutely remarkable. And Danny had that vision. She also had the courage to pursue that. And that's really what I encourage younger doctors to do, is develop that vision. Don't necessarily look at me and say that's the way I have to do things. It's a different time. Yeah. And we need to work together on that. So I really enjoy empowering people and just kind of getting out of their way and supporting them and encouraging them and help them. I think oftentimes there's people that have visions out there. They don't recognize the opportunity associated with a vision. And I think that's why oftentimes in my mentoring relationships, it's about me asking the questions just to get people thinking about what's possible. And the same old way of doing things, it's not necessarily the right way.
One of the things that I hear frequently is time off. People want more time off. Some companies are offering unlimited time off, not necessarily in the veterinary profession, but there is a ask for more time off. So how does that impact the business to have, for example, open-ended or unlimited time off? How does that impact the practice and other doctors in the practice?
Yeah, and that's really challenging because so many practices have this set business model, and they have a set number of hours that we need to have doctors working in our exam rooms. And as I go back to talking about this unprecedented increase in demand for veterinary services, and we've got more and more a fair number of doctors that are leaving the profession, and we've got younger doctors that are coming in. There's a disconnect there, as far as how we resolve that. I think that's where we need to look at a lot of non-traditional things, and how do we leverage technology in our practices to make everybody more efficient? How do we leverage our support staff, our technicians? Our technicians are just so valuable in our practices today, and how do we leverage our technicians to technician-only appointment type things? What can they do so we can get our doctors doing what only doctors can do? And, that's, doing surgery. It's making a diagnosis. It's prescribing medications. And how do we run our businesses so that we can pay our technicians more money, just like we have to pay our veterinarians more money, so our seasoned technician who's been in our practice for 15 or 20 years doesn't feel forced to leave to go find another job doing something else, and that technician leaves the profession. Right. And so thinking about productive roles for them that they can add to our revenue streams in our practices, so we have more money available to pay them.
The profession is losing a lot of talent.
Losing a tremendous amount of talent, yeah.
So Emily, as you look forward to graduating from veterinary school, how much time off do you want? What are you hearing from your colleagues in school, and should that be unpaid or paid time off?
Yeah, so I think I hear two different things. Some people I talk to want to work the regular 5-6 day week and then are asking for 3 to 4 weeks off. Usually, from what I've heard, is half paid, half unpaid. Other students I've talked to are less interested in weeks off if they are able to get a 4-day work week. They feel that the 3-day weekend is sufficient in helping with vacation time. I'm personally would be interested in 2 weeks paid, 2 weeks unpaid time off, and not being consecutive time off, using the weeks consecutively.
How is technology changing and how is that impacting the profession?
I think there's really a challenge for a lot of these small, independently owned veterinary practices to keep up with technology. And so many of the practices I look at that I work in, they can't keep up with technology, let alone keeping up with just replacing the number of computers they have in their practices. And I think to me that's I think there's so many great technological solutions that are out there. How do we do remote examinations? When I talk to veterinary students, somebody will probably be doing surgery remotely. What does that look like? I don't know that anybody knows exactly what that looks like, but that will probably happen. And I think that veterinary practices, veterinarians, we need to just open our eyes and look at what's possible as far as applying technology. That's our world today. That's the world we live in.
How does the industry deal with the mental stress and compassion fatigue issues?
I don't see it dealing with it a lot, unfortunately. So in the situations that I when I go to schools and talk, or when I go to conferences and engage and stuff like that, it's talked about there, but I really don't see it getting talked about a lot in practices. Now, there is something that I have seen is I've seen some of your larger hospitals, there's an individual in the facility that's their true job is maintaining the health of the employees of the facility. They often will also be available to clients that need to reach out for emotional help or something like that if they're going like rough euthanasia and stuff like that. But in the specific example I'm thinking of, on most days when this individual works, she literally, part of her job is to walk through each office of each so this hospital has internal medicines in this office and so on and so forth. So she goes into each office and she just says, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" And most of the time everybody's pretty dismissive and just doesn't, "Oh, we're fine, thanks," and she goes on her way. But it's that the fact that her face is there and people know that she's there, I think that's the biggest sign that I've seen that there are some places that are really kind of trying to take it a little bit more seriously. I don't think you're gonna see really obvious, tangible change. I just don't think it's one of those moments. It's just not a situation where you're gonna see an obvious, "Oh, look at the impact this is having." But the option of having that there, I think, is because sometimes that's all you really need is you just need to know. Yeah, and that's. I think you would probably be better at commenting if that is all that's needed because you work with the students that are having more of these issues. Is that true?
I think we will. Yeah, I think that would help a lot. I think that would be a big step in the right direction. I know schools are also doing certain schools are doing a lot to kind of change how they address it with students. And so I think as we graduate more and more students, we might see a bigger change with that because I know, at least among the populations of students that I speak with, a lot are very, very passionate about making that change. So as we get more of these graduates into our profession, maybe that change will come and we'd be able to see a market change.
Yeah.
And Emily and William, how long do you expect to stay in clinical practice, and do you have any interest in practice ownership?
So when I was originally in vet school, ownership seemed obvious. I was really involved with the VBMA and working with different, doctors that were out and stuff. And practice ownership really seemed like the obvious direction. And then the corporates happened. I was kind of in the time frame when that really started to take off, and it's really kind of taken a huge, that significant value or market value. And now there is plenty of opportunity for ownership. It's just, it's not the easy pickings. You got to work to either find a place that needs work and fix it up and stuff like that. It's just like the housing market and real estate and stuff like that. So it has become less appealing to me as I've been out. How long will I stay in clinical practice really depends on the opportunities that present themselves to me. I am not bound to clinical practice, nor do I see practice as the only, like actual practicing as the only way that I'm going to be happy. And so if certain companies came to me tomorrow and offered me a position that sounded great, I would finish out the contracts that I have right now, and I would go straight out of clinical practice. Yeah, but I also know very well how easy it is to do things like relief. I mean, this is my whole business model. So I don't think even if I went and worked full time in industry of various sizes, I wouldn't really be leaving clinical practice, because I always have the option to do relief if I'm getting like antsy one day, and you can just. So I know how easy it is to do stuff like that. So, yeah.
What are you hearing from your colleagues, and what are they saying about practice ownership?
I think it's becoming less and less of an interest in students. I'm a little biased being in a business organization that a lot of people want to own practices. But when I go back to my classmates, that's less and less of a desire of theirs to become the business owner.
What about you?
I have an interest in it. I'm more interested in the business ownership aspect than I am in practicing, actually. Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the affordability of vet care and the student debt issue?
Oof. I think that the student debt issue is a well talked about issue. I would be curious to see what your perspective on it, having dealt with a lot of students and stuff, and also having seen that change over the years. I would be really curious to hear that. I've talked with Emily and a lot of the other students about their debt issues and the stress that it is. And that's the reality is that it is a reality, and there's not anything that the current students are really going to be able to do about it. It's an inevitability that they're going to be graduating with, and that's unfortunate, but it's also something I think, like, a lot of times we're talking about, well, how do we address this and stop it from getting worse? And it feels like there's this 10-year generation of individuals that are just getting like forgotten about, almost like y'all are just gonna have to deal with it. We're trying to fix it for like future generations, but the current one. So like that's the debt issue is it's a tough one. It's a really tough one, but I'd be curious to hear both of y'all's comments on that.
Yeah, I think the student debt issue is something that I've really been engaged in for quite a while, and I think it's something that really, has really developed over maybe the last 20 years. And I think if you look at just as what has happened, and it's not only the veterinary profession. I mean, it affects everybody. And, if you look 20 years ago, as a society in the United States, we just chose not to fund colleges the way they used to be funded. And I think in 2000, the University of Wisconsin got about 45 to 55% of its budget from the state of Wisconsin. Today, it's about 15% of the budget comes from. So we've taken that off taxpayers and have put it on the backs of students. And it didn't happen overnight, but it happened quickly. And, somebody's got to pay for that. And so now, we kind of look as owners of veterinary practices, we try to come up with strategies as how can we have new graduates come into our practices and start producing more revenue earlier in their career so they can receive a greater salary. You look at the lifetime earnings of anybody, the greatest factor that determines the lifetime earnings is what you make in your first year of full-time employment. And that doesn't make any difference if you're paid as an intern or if you're paid as a regular practicing veterinarian, because 1 year of that, and that has a huge impact. You talk about the influx of private equity money and corporate veterinary medicine. There's an unprecedented flow of capital that's coming into our profession, an unprecedented flow of capital. And I think it's a two-edged sword. I think it's good and I think it's bad. What strategies can we as a profession, can we as practice owners use to preserve that capital in the profession to the benefit of our practices and the benefit of our veterinarians and the benefit of our staff? And I think that's a challenge. But I don't necessarily think that corporatization is necessarily a bad thing, just because of the capital that's coming into the profession.
I mean, we would
need
not
it to serve it. To
absolutely.
solve
If it were not for the original, conglomerate Banfield coming into this profession, we would still be talking about salaries of $50,000 for your new grads. The reason that we're talking about this is because of all of that capital that was flooded in. So I really don't like when people bash on corporates, because we are the profession we are today, and we have the potential we have today because of a lot of that stuff. But anyways, your comments on the debt stuff?
I think better education is needed with actual students before they graduate, how to manage your debt. Learning that you don't necessarily need to borrow all that is offered to you. And a lot of students don't understand the repayment options either. So I think education just needs to be stronger.
More education on the financial planning side.
I wonder if when graduates are going to practices, are the practices themselves, like the hiring practices, talking to the students about their own financial issues? Like, there's always the talk of salary, but is that something that you guys, like, in the hiring process, or do you engage with the students?
So we are becoming more and more proactive in that area, and we're actually, in our practices in Wisconsin right now, we're working on putting together a formal financial planning, for not only our recent graduates, but for all of our employees, because that's been identified as something that everybody sees as high value. I think, going back to the student debt issue, I think there's a lot of things kind of at the grassroots level that can be done. Yeah. And for example, at the University of Wisconsin, it comes to this, how much student loan am I going to take out? At Madison, they used to award scholarships in the spring after people already had to take their student loans out for the next fall. So one simple thing they did at Wisconsin is they awarded scholarships for the next year in the fall semester. So somebody knows that, okay, I've got a $5,000 scholarship in my pocket, I can take out less student loan. And those little things like that can have a huge impact over trying to pay back this debt over 25 or 30 years. Looking at the interest rates on some of these loans. I mean, it just amazes me that there are people out there that are paying 7, 9, 10, 12% on student loan debt. It just amazes me. We have to come up with a way to bring that interest rate down. Yeah. We need to find ways where practices can help pay down that student loan. And there needs to be some legislative change in some of these areas. Student loan debt, the interest paid on it, why isn't it tax deductible? Why can't you deduct that off your taxes? Yeah. Again, it would help a little bit.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of...
Let's not get into politics, though.
No, but I think there's a lot of little grassroots things out there that people can involve in, and you can kind of help your little part of the world. So, maybe me as a practice owner, maybe I can help a recent graduate get a lower interest loan. I can maybe figure out a way where the practice can help pay some of that student loan debt. Right. All those things I think can add up and make a difference and make that debt more palatable.
In the hiring agencies, like as in the practices that you're talking with, is that something that has been a part of the conversation with the hiring practices? Not
so much. Some more companies that we work with are starting to try to figure out how they can develop programs to help the students pay off their debt. But I would say the discussion on the financials is more about the salary and the compensation and the benefits. Some of the employers I've seen have said don't want to talk about that issue with the students, or they don't have a solution for it.
Do you guys think that it would be of value?
I think so.
I'm saying you as speaking for the entire student body of the United States.
Yes. Yeah. I think so, especially as we're bridging the gap and trying to get schools to take on that role. I don't think it necessarily will continue to need or should continue to be with the employer, but maybe that would be beneficial as we bridge the gap in getting schools to kind of take on that.
So the other part of that question that did you have something?
I think 10 years ago, that whole discussion was off limits, is kind of the way I felt. Yeah. Finances are very, very private. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about debt. That's changed in the last 10 years. And, people want to talk about debt. And so as part of the hiring process, frequently we'll ask, how much student loan debt do you have? Some people want to share that, some people don't. Right. But it doesn't hurt to ask the question. It doesn't hurt to have the discussion.
Yeah. The other part that you had mentioned in that previous topic was affordability of vet care. And I would love to know these guys' perspectives on that. From a current coming out student, do you have any concept of the cost of vet care these days?
Outside of a specialty hospital, no.
Okay.
It's not talked about much.
Okay. And in a specialty hospital, what do you think?
So at like a school hospital, referral hospital, the opinion is that it's elevated and expensive for people to pay, but people are always there and always come. And owners, pets are your family. And so owners are more and more willing to pay large sums of money to take care of their animals. So I think there's a couple different factors to it.
Okay. Do you think it's good, bad? It is what it is?
I think it is what it is. I don't have a positive or negative opinion of it.
I think it's a great question. And
I'm just very curious.
I think the cost for veterinary care is high.
Yeah.
I think it's very high. And I think it's moving higher and higher all the time. And if I look back at my career, most practice management consultants, they would come in and the solution to everything was to raise your fees. Yeah. And they would come back the next year and they would say, raise your fees, and raise your fees again, and raise your fees again. And if you look at what the cost of veterinary care has done in relation to just regular inflation, I mean, it's astronomical how it's bad. It's bad how it's growing. The cost for healthcare, and I think that so I think in most of our practices, we are providing services to the high end of the demographic. Yeah. And I think there's a tremendous number of animals out there that are in need of healthcare. And I think that's one of the big opportunities for the profession is to figure out how to make our services, to come up with business models that make our services more affordable. Not necessarily cheaper, but more affordable. And oftentimes it's just about offering solutions, and it might not, referring to that high-end specialty hospital for a lot of people might not be the affordable solution that they need.
It's a two-edged sword, kind of like you mentioned before about the affordability of care is skyrocketing, and you have a lot of practices and newer graduates that are catering towards this referral model. They aren't doing things, they're just referring. And I see it very commonly where things come to me in a specialty or ER hospital, and they are there for not the right reasons. They are not there because they're there to receive care. If you had any conversation with this person prior to transferring to me, you would have realized that there is not a chance in heck that the exam fee that I'm charging them pretty much expends their budget, and that is a huge disservice to the animal population and to those clients, because there are a lot of times where there were options available to them prior to spending all of their money on my exam fee and stuff like that. And so I really worry about the affordability of vet care, and I'm a little sad that that's not something that gets talked about at all in vet schools.
Well, and I think, as I stated before, what we're looking for in our practices are really good general practitioners that are willing to say, yes, I can help you.
Yeah, and
I can help you.
Right, and I remember when I was first coming out, like 4 or 5 years ago, it was an unfortunate reality, but if you had for example, a parvo dog come in and the clients just really didn't spend money and it was sick, euthanasia was an option. I have not euthanized a parvo puppy. I mean, there are some that are that super, super sick, and that's fine. That's appropriate. But if they're not that sick, that's not an option anymore, because the hospitals that we are in, it's a generally accepted. There are some cases where it doesn't matter if there are finances available or not. There's some things, and so I have seen it balancing out a little bit in some directions, but it's just shocking to see the skyrocketing costs of certain vet care. And you mentioned that it's tailoring to this higher market, and you're absolutely right. It's the higher level of the economy that we're tailoring to. But according to many economics, that population of demographics is shrinking. And so as practices and veterinarians are coming out, our available pool of clientele is theoretically shrinking. So we really need to be looking at the other markets.
What are other business models?
Yeah.
What are other business models?
Absolutely.
And you can, I know that you can put together a business model that will service, people that don't have, but you just need to look at what your costs are associated with those business models, and you can put together a very profitable, very successful business plan with that caters to people that don't have this, that are not in this high demographic.
So what are some of your predictions for how the veterinary profession is going to change over the next 5 to 10 years?
Do you want to start with that, Emily?
You go for it.
So I think that I see a couple trends. The first of all is that we are going to continue seeing emergency and specialty hospitals becoming more relevant. I think that there already are in most areas of the country, but it's usually denser population areas that's a thing. I think that we're going to see more of that available, but I also, at the same time, I think you're going to see a shrink in the actual size of facilities. And the reason I say that, or maybe the frequency of the number of them, is because just like access to veterinary care, hopefully it's going to get better for those smaller populations. Access to higher level care is also going to get better. Telemedicine has this amazing ability, or telehealth, I should say, to provide access to stuff. So you in Wisconsin, your hospital needs a neurologist, but it's the dead of winter and there's, I don't know, how much is a lot of snow? A foot of snow? Is that a lot?
Sure.
Okay, there's a lot of snow outside. Like, you can't get them to a neurologist. Well, fortunately, we live in a world. I'm from Texas, for what it's worth. I don't know snow.
A foot of snow doesn't slow us down.
Okay, well, whatever.
Maybe 2 feet of snow.
Okay, but like that previously, you didn't really have it. You could call them on a phone, but now that's not the case. You can literally you can video conference with a neurologist, and they will walk you through during a neuro exam and stuff like that. That is the level that we're going to. So in the next 5 years, I think that many hospitals are going to get more access to higher levels of care, and it's not going to require you to actually send it necessarily to a hospital. There will always be specialty hospitals, just like there always have been, right? When you graduated back in the day, they existed. They just weren't common like they are now. So I think you're going to see that. I also think that we're going to see an increase in the value and the usage of technicians. I really think that is where we have to go, because it doesn't look like we're adding veterinarians for the most part, right? You're going to see a lot of vets leaving as well as vets coming in. And so, comment aside about how many vet schools are opening and stuff, I don't think that we're going to fix the shortage of veterinarians problem. We have to make the system more efficient. And the way we do that is we leverage the resources that are not being leveraged right now, and that's our technicians. So that's the trend I see that's going to happen.
I definitely agree. I think we're going to be forced to change in certain ways because of shortages, and we need to find ways to address the issues that are facing our profession today so that we can evolve. And I think we're going to have to move towards the things like William said so that we can stay a fruitful profession.
If you had to make a prediction, though, what do you think those changes are going to be?
So I honestly believe that once in schools, from all the conferences I go to, it's obviously a very skewed population of veterinary students, but they are very interested in being the leaders in the profession. They want to enact change. They have large goals that they want to accomplish. And so I really believe that once, in a couple of years, once we graduate more and more of the younger generations, that mental health will be addressed more. One thing that I'm a little concerned for is still the rural veterinarians. That's still a shortage, and I don't see that getting fixed anytime soon.
I happen to think it's a really exciting time for veterinary medicine.
I couldn't agree more.
I think back, we were talking about Eleanor Green earlier, and Eleanor is, soon to no longer be the dean of Texas A&M, but she's just this great visionary. And I remember having dinner with Eleanor a few years ago, and we were having this discussion about change and what does the future look like. And we talked about going back 100 years to our contemporaries sitting around the table having dinner. And at that point in time, 1910, 1915, 1920. Up until that point in time, the only thing veterinarians did was take care of horses. and then it was the advent of the automobile. And in a very short period of time, 90% of the horse population went away. And so we think we have challenges today, you know. But you think about our contemporaries then sitting around, you know, having this conversation. Could they even imagine what the profession looks like today? Could they even imagine that most of our veterinarians are providing care to dogs and cats? Could they even imagine that dogs and cats are now not only living in our houses, but sleeping in our beds? And so you think about that change that occurred in this 100-year period of time. I think it's absolutely remarkable. And the one thing that we do know is that the thing about change is that it's happening more rapidly. So you start taking that 100 years and shrinking it into, you know, that 100-year change and shrinking that into maybe 20 years. It's easy to say that these are challenges, but I just see them as opportunities. And I see them, I think veterinarians can, you know, if we position ourselves as the leaders in animal health, and remain really relevant in animal health, I think there's going to be so many opportunities that are going to open up for veterinarians and for technicians. I think you look at the way the role dogs and cats are playing in our society today and how many people have dogs and cats and how the population is increasing. To me, it's a really exciting time with all the technology that's coming along. What do those practice models look like? And I think it's just, so that's why when people come to me and want to be mentored, it's like, I want to be mentored by you guys because, you know, I want to hear your ideas on how we're going to apply these things. And yeah, how you're going to be doing surgery remotely on this. You know, you might be living in Chicago, Illinois, and doing surgery on a dog in the middle of nowhere of northern Wisconsin. And that's how we solve that. We solve that problem, is using technology. I think, you know, you look at big data and, you know, the wearables for dogs and cats and horses and what are being done in those lines, cows for that matter. You know, and how you're going to be able to predict based on behavior that, yeah, 3 days from now, that dog's going to need to be on antibiotics or whatever, you know, and how is that going to change the way veterinarians interact with their patients? So I think it's a really exciting time.
As we wrap up, Scott, are there any pieces of advice that you would give to Emily as she finishes school and starts her journey in the veterinary profession?
Absolutely. So my words of advice to you is exactly what I was just talking about, is really think big and develop that vision. And, you know, sometimes these ideas, we think, you know, we kind of keep them to ourselves and we think they're crazy. There's validity in them. So follow that dream, follow that vision, have the courage to say yes, and have the courage in yourself to really believe that you can do these things and that you can make a difference, because you can. And the other thing I would say is to act with urgency, because I think it's remarkable that I graduated in 1991. I mean, it seems like just yesterday, and here it's been almost 30 years since I graduated from veterinary school. So your vision, have the courage to say yes, and do it with urgency.
I would just echo that I'm excited. I'm excited for this procession. There is change coming, but it can be a good change, and I'm excited for that. So
I appreciate being able to sit here and hear different perspectives as still a student. So thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your participation. It was fun.